Okay. Well, so maybe this is like a weird thought experiment, but I this intrigues me. So what if, let's say that we had a society where we had, like a suicide booth, like in Futurama, or I think they're making one in Switzerland, or they've talked about it recently,
Yeah.
um, to voluntarily end your existence. Do you think, would that mitigate the harm or the moral issue of bringing a child into existence? I'm not saying like it would be completely gone, but like in a society where anyone can voluntarily end their existence, couldn't you sort of say, well, the harm of existence, I mean, we have a self-correcting mechanism for that. If you really want to get off this train, you can. And maybe that the issue is that in our society we have like a really weird moral prohibition to suicide.
Yeah.
That like in the Christian religion, when you die, you go up to be with all your family and friends and
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
in eternal bliss, but it's terrible to kill yourself.
Hmm.
And I think it's actually a Nietzsche aphorism where he says it's there's a justice with which we take a man's life, like in the death penalty, but there's no justice with which we take a man's death. That it's, if there's any right that somebody has, this should be the right to terminate their life.
Hmm.
And so, do you think if we had a society that was had like a clear right to die, that would you, maybe I'll put it to you like this: would you have less problem bringing somebody into that world?
That's a tough question, you know.
I know. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
uh, uh,
I mean,
I would,
I could see the objection in spite of it, because I mean, typically when people do kill themselves, they've already suffered a lot, right? So
yeah.
that, I think there's another quote. I'm sorry, I know I asked you a question, I'm answering it, but I'm thinking of another quote. I think it's Ian Shioran, that the problem with suicide
Mm.
is we always do it too late. So,
Yeah. Oof. I didn't mention Shiran, but I guess I didn't want to make the audience feel too depressed. But if you are
right,
interested about,
you don't want to say his name and then have some poor soul go and read one of his books.
oh yeah, but if you're
I
interested
love
in,
Shioran, but yeah.
yeah, me too. If anyone here that listens is interested into hard pessimism, you should research around the inconvenience of being born, the heights of despair, are great ways to feel depressed. But
Yeah.
anyway, what I would say to you that perhaps I may grant you that there will be less of a moral issue there, considering that once that person is brought into existence, they can decide by themselves to end it. I like to use this analogy of being uh, put into a what was it? Yeah, being put into a trip to Mars without
Hmm.
your consent. You just wake up and you're inside
an
uh,
an Elon Musk SpaceX
yeah,
generational ship to Mars.
to Mars, and then you say, well, why didn't you consult me? I don't want to do this. And then it will tell you, well, we cannot go back. We're already here, and we are already on our way to Mars. And then you say, well, how much will it take, or how long will it take? We don't know, and all of that. What I'm saying is that you're just stuck there, without the possibility of not going. And it pretty much has like it is some sort of metaphor with being brought to existence and then not having the possibility to end it in a, let's say, painless and efficient way. Uh, Although we have the technical means to do so, we do not allow people to access those means. I guess that is the issue in a very concrete way. Um, it might make me feel at least a little less cautious of creating another life, or about thinking about the possibility of someone creating another life. But then I would have to consider two things. First, that the person that is brought into existence and that does not want to continue their existence may not have the means to uh, communicate their desire to no longer continue it, or to do that by themselves, or to ask for help to do so. Uh, in that hypothetical scenario when there is no active prohibition of doing so. And the other problem that we have is that to put that person into the predicament of whether they would like or to continue their lives or not would have been avoided altogether if they were never brought into existence in the first place. So I would say that never bringing someone else into existence just eliminates all of those situations in which the person is in extreme suffering and has to ponder, or it is put into the position of pondering whether they would want us to continue their lives or not. So, yeah, I guess that's all
Yeah.
for now. I would say.
What would you say? I guess something that just occurs to me now is that I think when I think about the reasons why people actually like end up having kids, right? I think a lot of the reason is that it's a attempt at gaining immortality, and I don't mean
Yeah.
that. I don't think that people are like naive about this. Like, you know, obviously, no, everyone knows they're going to die,
Hmm.
but they're, you know, it's like it's almost, you could argue, I mean, I think it's fair to say that it is pretty instinctual to want to reproduce yourself,
Hmm.
and that that instinct, you know, we launder it through our consciousness, and then we come up with all these reasons. But at the end of the day, like, people want to leave behind another being that still exists, that's a part of
Hmm.
them after they die, and that's just sort of like a deep desire that they have. I guess I would ask, do you, is there, is it in some sense like kind of difficult to really argue with that, because that's really more of like an instinct or a feeling than a reason?
Mm.
And to the extent that you would still argue with it anyway, I mean, um, I don't know. Is there some, maybe this is appealing to the natural fallacy, but
Hmm.
there's
Yeah.
something kind of in me that like sees that as, well, that's what people naturally want to do. Maybe that's a way of easing their suffering of being alive, and
Mm.
so I would put that to you that way, I guess.
Yeah, I've also considered that, consciously or not, many people see their offspring as some sort of extension, the indirect extension of themselves. We could see it in biological terms as in they have a portion of their DNA, right? Or
Mm.
in terms of or in more simpler terms, for many centuries there was the idea of your how can I say it in Spanish? Like your bloodline or your name, yeah, that your name is passed onto the next generation and so on. Uh, but and I think that
Is there a word for that in Spanish you were thinking of, like, or a
yeah,
term or concept?
yeah, your linaje like
Linaje.
name.
Okay. Lineage, kind of, I guess.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah, your
Okay.
lineage. Uh, and so uh, that issue has to do a lot with what you mentioned, what you pointed out, and also other psychologists and philosophers have pointed out, which is that we are constantly trying to avoid thinking about death or trying to defeat the undefeatable, which is death, and bringing a new life and thinking that new life that we have brought as an extension of ourselves and that it will continue once we are dead. It is, in a sense, indirectly or not, a way to ease the, let's say, the existential angst of or the fear of facing your mortality. And but I do not think that it is the only way of trying to ease or to quell the pain and the psychological angst of having to face that undeniable fact that we are all going to die. So you also mentioned, I will try to address it, the idea that it is natural or instinctual for humans to want to reproduce, and thus it would seem it would seem too, let's say, too ridiculous or too demanding to try to stop, or not stop, or to try to say you shouldn't do what is part of your nature to a natural being. But then I would say that there are many things that are into that issue that make me think, and that's my own interpretation of it, that in itself, what we desire as a prime instinct is not reproduction per se. Rather, we are just sexual beings, and that's part of the nature. And our own system tries to encourage all kinds of behaviors that would increase the probabilities of creating a new biological copy of our DNA. And that's why sex is pleasurable. And that's why the majority of people view it, or well, when they are so horny, they just do not consider the consequences of their actions. So,
Right.
so what I'm saying is that people in themselves do not want, as an instinct, do not want to have children. What they want is to have sex, and then having sex ends up in most or many cases as a result of that, like a pregnancy. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that if we actually, like in deep inside ourselves, wanted to have children all the time when we engage in any kind of sexual act, there wouldn't be any there will be the complexity of human sexuality that goes way beyond the act of penetration and the act of heterosexuality. And there wouldn't be the idea and the desire for humans to create contraception methods that have gone a long way for centuries and centuries, and they have been created more and more sophisticated up to now. Uh, of course, the most effective one is abstinence, but that's another issue.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
uh, so if we try to come up with all of those methods to try to avoid creating a new life when we either don't want or cannot take care of it, then that in itself factually invalidates the idea that it is natural for us to always want to procreate. Uh, so I will tell you that although birth in itself is a natural process in terms of physiological process, like in itself, it is not natural to procreate. It is instinctual to want to do the things that increase the probability of procreating, but the act of creating new life is not like a natural thing itself. And even if it were natural, it wouldn't be ethically justified. But that's another thing that you also know.
Yeah, I think Schopenhauer called it the devil's laughter. They would. I'm going to use.
Yeah,
I'm going to use the crude internet term. It was his term for post nut clarity, as they
both
call it.
not clarity. Yeah,
But it's interesting, just in light of what you're talking about, because it's what it really is the realization of, oh, I thought I was this rationally deliberating individual, but I was actually just following this physiological urge that is actually a very stupid urge, a blind, stupid urge. And I'm just, realizing that you're this marionette for your instincts is not a very pleasurable experience for a lot of people.
yeah,
Um, I wanted to ask you maybe one or two more questions and we'll wrap it up.
sure.
I wanted to ask you kind of maybe shift gears a little bit, just something that
Hmm.
occurred to me. There's a lot of talk recently about like transhumanism
Yeah.
and people who have put forward the idea that our biology, our physiology could be improved on either by cybernetics or by genetic engineering or whatever,
Mhm.
or even the idea that our consciousness could be uploaded to some sort of computer or into a digital world or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think under those conditions, we could conceive of an existence that has most, if not all, of like the suffering that you're talking about, like stripped out of it. Like, I don't know if you've watched like Black Mirror, but there's an episode called San Junipero where basically when people get old at a
Oh
certain age,
yeah.
they can have their brain basically put into, and they're just sort of living in a resort. And I mean, I guess a large part of the episode is how they still have their like little conflicts and um they're suffering from each other, basically from their own relationships and things like that. But ultimately, um, they decide that they want to continue living, and they don't have like those real existential harms of like coming mortality or pain or anything like that.
Yeah. It-
Under so what? Yeah, what do you think about that?
under those circumstances, yes, I've also considered that. And I mean, I haven't done an extensive research on all of the transhumanist uh, ideas and thought experiments and possibilities. Uh, I do consider them highly provocative, to say the least. And the thing that bothers me is that what would happen in that situation is that we would end up leaving a sort of, well, no, I wouldn't call it leaving. Let's say that we'll end up having some sort of conscious experience, let's say, uh, that it is not actually leaving. And I'm talking about the possibility of, uploading your consciousness once
Mhm.
you're physically dead, your body is no longer working, but all of the intricacies of your conscious are, let's say, copied and uploaded into some sort of digital world. It is no longer life itself. It is, let's say, some sort of
Like a facsimile of life, or like
yeah,
a
let's say that it would be some sort of uh, very sophisticated uh, video game that idealizes or tries to copy the experience of being alive while subtracting many of the uh, fundamental features of life itself. And so it is some sort of human ideal, come bring it is some sort of human ideal that's trying to be materialized by the idea of being able to upload your consciousness. Because once you do so, people will not want to live in a world that is exactly the same as the one they live now. They may want to have trouble there, but trouble that can be resolved, or things that are not making them uh, are not putting them in the same condition and the same existential condition that humans are put in once they are here in the real world. And I'm talking about, for instance, things uh, such as having a real need to 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 uh, uh, to satisfy your most basic biological needs, to being exposed to risks and diseases and
yeah, okay.
natural disasters, and the cruelty and indifference of the natural world and all of that. We accept it, but most of the time we don't want to
Well,
think a
that's
lot
that's
about them.
interesting. Just to interrupt you, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but that's interesting because you're listing some things there that I feel a lot. Many antinatalists might say are like the textbook harms of existence. But it's funny. I think we can kind of agree here that there's like almost some human want for some degree of risk or like danger. Um,
yeah.
and so I don't know. Is that maybe a little, I don't know. I guess it doesn't have to be problematic for the antinatalist position, but it kind of it complicates things, right? Because there's like a little bit of like pain in all the pleasure and a little bit of pleasure in all the pain. And it's
Yeah.
very I think I agree with you. It's very hard to imagine like a, a fake digital world ever approximating that.
The problem is that it is a fantasy first. So
Right.
uh, and the problem with fantasy, a psychoanalyst would say, is that once they are realized, there's a word for that, and it's called a nightmare. And the problem with it is that it denies the very nature of how the world works and tries to simplify it in terms of wanting to fulfill a perfect, flawless version of existence. And so that's why, for me,
It kind of,
immortality, yeah.
oh, it kind of, you could say that if we look at the Schopenhauer model, that puts it switches into the boredom side of the pendulum swing,
Yeah.
right? Of the life, like swings between. Sorry, a thing that just came to mind. There's an old episode of The Twilight Zone, the one from the
Oh, yeah.
1960s, called "Nice Place to Visit," which is it's the first half of the idiom, "Nice place to visit," but you wouldn't want to live there. And it's a guy who dies, and he thinks he's in heaven. He's getting every wish satisfied, and
It's
he
actually
quickly
hell.
realizes that
Yeah.
this is hell, is that every desire is fulfilled. And he has his personal angel, who he later realizes is like a personal tormentor, but he keeps asking him because he was like a criminal in his life. He's like, well, I want to knock off a place, I want to do a robbery. And he says, oh, that can be arranged. How much money do you want to steal? And he's like, well, no, I have to have some risk. Can't there be a chance I could get put away? He's like, oh, sure. But he's like, well, but it wouldn't be real, because if I asked you to, I can't actually die. And it's like he realizes that that element of risk, or that element of danger, or all those things being gone, makes everything boring. And at the end, he's begging. He's saying, I want to go to the other place. And that's when he realizes he is in the other place. So he's begging for
Mhm.
torture as some means of breaking up the monotony of every desire being fulfilled. So I think that goes to your point, I guess.
Yeah. I also like thinking about that episode from time to time. I remember watching it many years ago. Uh, because what I was going to say is that that's one of the reasons why I think that immortality would be horrible. Even
Yeah.
though, I mean, for many centuries, humans have longed for immortality as a way to, I mean, essentially as a way to deny death. But thinking about continuing to live, and even more so, living in some sort of heaven or paradise where all of your desires are fulfilled, and there are no problems whatsoever, and everything is perfect and whatever, um, and living there with the same consciousness in which you live here in this world would be a nightmare, because in it has to do, at least that's my perspective, it has a lot to do with how our brain is wired from an evolutionary perspective. So we would say that our brain was wired to survive and to avoid danger and to solve problems. And so it doesn't only need some sort of stimulation from the environment in order to adapt to it, in order uh, to try to survive and face adverse circumstances, but it needs problems, real problems, in order to keep it running and keep some sort of stability and sanity. And when you live in this perfect world, when there's no risks, no problems, no surviving, no nothing, the brain, as we know it, would go mad. Is it
Mm.
is it is it is like the scenario in which you are just isolated. I mean, it is a torture. You're just isolated and there's no stimulation whatsoever. Both the complete utter lack of stimulation, as well as an excess of stimulation and pleasure without any risks and without any need for survival, are both detrimental for the human brain and can lead to some sort of nightmare, some sort of hellish scenario that is far more complex than just feeling physical pain. And I think that's one of
Yeah.
the reasons. That's one of the reasons why uh, thinking about this perfect uh, virtual reality in which your conscience, your awareness can be uploaded, and then you will live experience after experience of a fake world. It might be for some people something that they will want to do, provided that they I don't know, for some reason they forget that the world they're living is not real, that they live in some sort of platonic illusion where they believe that they are actually living and facing those risks and having some sort of fulfillment. Perhaps one would say that they will be content and satisfied with that. But to think of it as an actual possibility, for me, to people to deny their actual lives and wanting to just plug in into that virtual reality, for me that would be very dystopian.
Yeah. I think that's part of why religions have struggled with depictions of heaven, because an eternity of anything starts to sound like it sucks, which it's why I think it was Tertullian who said one of the best pleasures of heaven will be getting to look at all the suffering in hell. So